Welcome back to Sip and Talk. I'm Joe.
And I'm Sunny.
Grab your favorite beverage, folks, because today we're definitely stirring things up. We're going to unpack something really captivating.
Yeah, and honestly, a bit bewildering, too.
It really is. We're stepping into this geopolitical arena that, feels less like careful diplomacy sometimes and maybe more like watching a magic show.
Right, like a master illusionist, but instead of pulling rabbits out of hats, they're using historical documents. It's wild.
Exactly. We're talking about what we're calling China's historical document magic trick and how it all plays out with Taiwan's sovereignty. It's this incredible tug of war.
Yeah, where each side presents a totally different picture. It's like one of those optical illusions, Depending on how you look at it, you see something completely different.
And both sides are absolutely convinced their view is the only reality.
So our mission today, for you listening, is really to try and cut through some of that noise, maybe that confusion.
Yeah, help understand the core arguments, from all the different angles. Why do they see things so differently?
And look, we're not here picking sides. We're not telling you what to think. The goal is just to give you the clearest picture we can based on, the facts as each side presents them and how others see it.
So you can really think for yourself.
Yeah.
Especially important, here in 2025 with President Trump back in the White House. The global stage is definitely dynamic.
That's one word for it. Okay, so where should we start unpacking this? Taiwan's perspective seems like the logical place.
Yeah, let's start there, what President Lai Ching-te has been saying. Because when you look at Taiwan's situation, just like on the ground, they make a pretty strong case for themselves, don't they?
They absolutely do. From Taiwan's viewpoint, it's not really a question of if they're independent. They argue they already are.
Just practically speaking.
Exactly. President Lai's core argument, and you hear this a lot within Taiwan, is that the island is functioning, in every practical sense as an independent entity. Full stop.
He made that point, didn't he, about elections? That even if a pro-independence president gets elected.
Yeah, which has happened multiple times, right? Across different parties, Chen Shui-bian, Tsai Ing-wen, now Lai Ching-te. His point is, if China can't actually stop that election from happening or stop that person from taking office...
Then doesn't that kind of prove Taiwan's independence right there?
That's the argument. It's a pretty powerful demonstration of sovereignty when you think about it. If a population can consistently choose its own leaders with their own distinct policies and no outside force can veto that choice.
That feels pretty tangible, like real self-governance, not just talk.
Exactly. It's a lived reality. And for Taiwan, this ability to choose their own future, hold free elections, have their own political voice, that is the concrete manifestation of their sovereignty. It's not just some claim based on, ancient history books. It's happening now.
Okay, so let's break that down a bit more formally. The classic definition of a country, those four elements: people, land, government, sovereignty. How does Taiwan stack up against those from their perspective?
Right, the Montevideo Convention criteria, essentially.
Yeah.
And this is where Taiwan really challenges the traditional view. Let's take people first.
Okay.
Taiwan has its own citizens. They hold Republic of China passports, which are, widely recognized for travel globally. They see themselves as a distinct political community.
So a defined population.
Yes. And crucially, they argue that these people collectively hold sovereignty. They determine their own destiny. They're not subjects of Beijing. Plus, you have distinct culture, social norms, a growing sense of Taiwanese identity separate from the mainland.
Makes sense. If you've got your own passport, live under your own laws, vote in your own elections, you're a distinct group.
Then there's land. They clearly control specific territories, the main island, obviously, but also Penghu, Kinmen, Matsu.
These aren't just lines on a map. They're administered areas.
Exactly. Defined borders, customs, millions of people living there under Taiwan's continuous administration. They control their airspace, their maritime zones. That screams territorial integrity.
Okay, people, land. What about government? Because, like you said, they've had stable transitions of power, democratic elections for decades now.
Right. A really robust multi-party democracy, elected government at all levels, local, national. This government does what governments do. Collects taxes, enforces laws, provides services, runs an independent legal system.
And crucially, conducts its own foreign policy, right? Has its own military.
Absolutely. It deals with other nations, maintains diplomatic ties where it can, and has its own well-equipped defense forces, totally separate from the PRC's military. It's a fully operational government managing national affairs.
So definitely not just like a provincial office reporting back to Beijing.
Yeah.
It's functioning independently.
That's the core of their argument. And finally, sovereignty. This is maybe the most contentious point externally, but internally, Taiwan's view is clear.
Which is?
Sovereignty is held firmly by the people of Taiwan themselves. You see this consistently in public opinion polls, strong preference for self-determination, maintaining the status quo, which for most means de facto independence.
And that phrase President Lai uses about not being subordinate.
Yes, that the Republic of China, ROC, and the People's Republic of China, PRC, are not subordinate to each other. That's a foundational pillar of their claim to independent sovereignty. A clear statement. We are not under Beijing's authority.
And the electoral history you mentioned, it really seems to back that up. Li Tenghui in 96, the first direct election, then Chen, Ma, Tsai, now Lai. It's a consistent democratic track record.
It's a clear, decades-long pattern of democratic transitions. By almost any international standard, that ability for citizens to choose and change their leadership is a defining marker of national self-determination. Statehood in practice.
What about the names, though? Sometimes it's ROC, sometimes ROC Taiwan, sometimes just Taiwan. Does that confusion weaken their case? Some people might argue that.
It's a fair question people raise, but from Taiwan's viewpoint, the specific name they use, or whether they're in the UN or how many countries formally recognize them, that doesn't actually define statehood.
It's about the substance, not the label.
Exactly. It's about having those four elements: people, land, government, sovereignty, and the people exercising self-determination through that government. The name flexibility is really a pragmatic response to the unique, intense international pressure they face, mainly from China. It's not about lacking a core identity.
Okay, that makes sense. It's adapting to a tough situation. Now, let's pivot. Let's look at China's claims, because Taiwan actively pushes back against them. A big one is UN Resolution 2758. China says this proves their sovereignty over Taiwan. How does Taiwan debunk that?
Right. This is a huge point of contention. China basically treats UN Resolution 2758 from 1971 as the smoking gun, the ultimate proof of their sovereignty, the basis for their one China principle.
Taiwan says.
Taiwan's counter, and it's one increasingly echoed internationally, is pretty straightforward. The resolution only dealt with who gets to represent China in the UN. That's it.
So it was purely about the seat, kicking out Chiang Kai-shek's ROC representatives and giving the seat to the PRC.
Precisely. It recognized the PRC as the sole legitimate representative of China in the United Nations. It did not say Taiwan is part of the PRC. It didn't address Taiwan's sovereignty or legal status at all.
And this isn't just Taiwan saying this.
Oh, no. The U.S. State Department has been very clear on this recently. The U.S. House passed resolutions clarifying it. The EU, Parliament, Australia, Canada, the UK, Belgium, Czech Republic, lots of democratic nations have explicitly stated 458 does not determine Taiwan's sovereignty. It was about UN representation, period.
Got it. So from Taiwan's view, China is massively over-interpreting that resolution for its own purposes.
That's the argument. A key part of the magic trick, perhaps.
Okay, what about China's broader claim? We hear all the time, Taiwan has been an inseparable part of China since ancient times. How does Taiwan counter that sweeping statement?
Yeah, that's a big one. And Taiwan has a really detailed historical counter-narrative. It starts way, way back, prehistoric and Austronesian roots. For thousands of years, long before any significant Chinese connection, Taiwan had its own indigenous populations. In fact, many scholars think Taiwan is the origin point for the entire Austronesian language family people who sailed across the Pacific.
Wow, so totally distinct cultures, languages, societies.
Completely separate from Han Chinese culture on the mainland, no political ties to China way back then.
So ancient times doesn't really fit China's claim there.
Not from Taiwan's perspective. Then, fast forward to the Age of Exploration. 17th century, you get Europeans showing up, the Dutch set up trading posts, forts, then the Spanish had a presence for a bit.
Still no China involved?
Nope. Indigenous people, then European colonists, but still no real political link to mainland China. Taiwan was part of global trade networks, but not governed by any Chinese dynasty.
So when did China first get involved, according to Taiwan's history?
The first significant link was in the mid-17th century. A Ming loyalist named Koxinga defeated the Dutch and set up a base there. Later, the Qing dynasty took control in 1683.
Okay, so there was Chinese rule.
There was, but, and this is crucial from Taiwan's perspective, it was brief Chinese dynastic rule, just over 200 years. And it wasn't always solid control over the whole island. And critically, that period ended definitively in 1895.
With the Treaty of Shimonoseki.
Exactly. After losing the First Sino-Japanese War, the Qing dynasty ceded Taiwan to Japan, legally severed the connection again.
And the Taiwanese people didn't just roll over when Japan took control, did they? There was resistance.
Absolutely not. This points to a long history of Taiwanese resistance. Right after being ceded, locals actually declared the Republic of Formosa to fight the Japanese takeover. It failed, but the resistance continued.
Throughout Japanese rule?
Yeah, for 50 years. Major uprisings like the Tapani incident, the Silayan incident, the Wuxi incident involving indigenous groups. It shows this pattern. The people on the island fought for their home, regardless of who the colonizer was. It wasn't about being Chinese. It was about self-determination.
Okay, that's a compelling counter-narrative. What about after World War II? The San Francisco Peace Treaty comes up a lot. How does Taiwan view that?
This is another critical point. Taiwan emphasizes that the People's Republic of China, founded in 1949, never actually governed Taiwan, ever.
Right.
The San Francisco Peace Treaty in 1951 had Japan renounce all rights and claims to Taiwan and Penghu. But the key legal point is, it didn't say who they were renounced to.
It didn't hand Taiwan over to the PRC, or even the ROC, technically.
Correct. It left Taiwan's ultimate legal status undefined in the treaty itself. The PRC wasn't even there. The ROC government, which had retreated to Taiwan, took over administration, but the treaty didn't grant them formal sovereignty either. This ambiguity is central to Taiwan's argument against China's claim of automatic ownership.
So China's claim that Taiwan just naturally reverted to them post-WWII doesn't hold water legally, according to Taiwan and the treaty text.
That's Taiwan's position, based on the treaty's silence on the matter.
Okay, so that covers the historical and legal arguments from Taiwan's side. But Taiwan's standing today isn't just about history, right? They have significant global achievements and face very real ongoing threats. Let's talk about their economy first.
Yeah, Taiwan's economic clout is massive, especially in tech. It's indispensable globally. Semiconductors are the big one.
The chips and everything.
Everything. Smartphones, computers, AI servers, cars, advanced weapons. A huge percentage of the world's most advanced chips are designed and made in Taiwan, mostly by TSMC.
So if something happened to Taiwan's chip industry?
Global economic catastrophe. Yeah. Seriously. It would grind multiple industries to a halt almost overnight. But it's not just chips. They're also leaders in high-end bicycles, machine tools, screws, even yachts. It's a critical node in the global supply chain.
It's like a linchpin for the modern world economy.
Pretty much. And beyond the economy, there's Taiwan's identity as a democratic and free society.
They rank really highly in global indices, right?
Consistently near the top. Democracy, press freedom, human freedom, economic freedom, safety, competitiveness. This isn't just, nice PR. It aligns Taiwan directly with the values of other democratic nations. It makes them a natural partner for countries like the US, Japan, European nations. They're seen as a model democracy in Asia.
Which naturally brings us to the threats they face, primarily from China. These aren't subtle.
Not at all. China poses multiple serious threats. Direct military threats, think jets crossing the median line, naval drills encircling the island, sovereignty pressure. Then there's pervasive infiltration and espionage. Efforts to sow discord internally.
And trying to confuse identity. Plus those other tactics.
Yeah, deliberate campaigns to confuse national identity through propaganda, expensive united front tactics, and this strategy called fusion development.
And you quickly unpack united front and fusion development for her.
United Front work is basically China's playbook for influencing and co-opting groups outside the Communist Party, both inside China and abroad. In Taiwan, it means targeting businesses, academics, local politicians, cultural groups, trying to win them over, neutralize opposition, or get them to promote Beijing's narratives, often subtly.
So influence operations.
Right. And fusion development is more economic. It's about integrating Taiwan's economy, businesses, youth, talent so deeply into the mainland system that separation becomes economically painful, almost unthinkable, blurring political lines through economic dependency.
Wow, okay. So sophisticated, long-term strategies, not just military pressure. How does Taiwan frame these threats? just about them or bigger?
They see it as much bigger, a threat not just to their own 23 million people, but to regional peace and stability, and even to the global democratic order. And the international community largely seems to agree.
Like the G7 statements.
Exactly. G7 leaders repeatedly say peace in the Taiwan Strait is indispensable to international security and prosperity. They oppose unilateral changes to the status quo by force. That's a clear sign they see Taiwan's security as linked to global stability.
So given all that, what's Taiwan's strategy? How are they responding?
It's multi-pronged. They're holding national security meetings, clearly labeling China an external hostile source. No mincing words there. The strategy focuses on strengthening national unity. President Lai emphasizes this a lot, protecting sovereignty, obviously, safeguarding the economy and those critical industries, and preserving their democracy.
Unity as the first line of defense.
That seems to be the message. Standing together against both military coercion and those subtler influence operations, building a resilient democratic society capable of weathering the storm.
Okay, that's a comprehensive look at Taiwan's perspective, their case for statehood, their history, their strengths, and how they're handling the threats. Now let's flip the coin. China's counter-narrative, the one China principle. This is where the worldviews just collide, right?
Absolutely collide. China's core claim is unwavering, simple, and relentlessly promoted. There is only one China. Taiwan is part of China. Full stop.
And the current situation is just temporary.
From their view, yes. Taiwan is just not yet unified. It's a rebel province, a temporary separation stemming from the Chinese Civil War, not a legitimate independent state. This isn't just policy. It's presented as an existential truth.
And they really push this hard internally, don't they? It's not just for foreign audiences.
Oh, completely. It's woven into the fabric of Chinese society from a young age. School textbooks, state media hammering it home daily, government policies reflecting it. It's a total national narrative.
How do they frame it to make it sound so inevitable?
They use selective historical snippets, maps always showing Taiwan as part of China, appeals to a shared bloodline, and this powerful idea of the great unification or great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation. It's packaged as righteous, patriotic, historically destined.
And they use Hong Kong and Macau as examples.
Yeah, they present the return of Hong Kong and Macau as models of peaceful fusion, conveniently leaving out the United Front tactics or the subsequent erosion of freedoms that worries Taiwan.
How do they react when other countries support Taiwan, even in small ways?
Immediate condemnation. Any international support, even just, a supportive tweet from a politician, is slammed as interference in China's internal affairs and a violation of UN resolutions, meaning their interpretation of 277 and 58.
Framing it as external forces trying to stop China's rise.
Exactly. Trying to destabilize China, prevent reunification. It's a very defensive, aggressive, diplomatic posture aimed at isolating Taiwan internationally.
So going back to those four elements of statehood, people, land, government, sovereignty, how does China counter each of Taiwan's points?
They have a specific rebuttal for each, designed to nullify Taiwan's claims entirely from their perspective. For people, they argue ROC nationals are fundamentally Chinese, just temporarily separated by the Civil War, not a distinct nationality.
And a land.
Land? Simple. Taiwan, Penghu, Kinmen, Matsu are all ancient Chinese territories, end of story. Any distinct indigenous history or periods of non-Chinese rule are irrelevant to this core claim.
And Taiwan's democratic government, the one they built over decades.
Dismissed. China views Taiwan's elected government as merely a local government, an administrative body operating under Beijing's ultimate sovereignty. It lacks any real international legitimacy as a state in their eyes.
Like a city council, basically.
Pretty much. And finally, sovereignty. China maintains that national sovereignty is indivisible and resides solely, eternally, with Beijing. Any other political entity on Taiwan claiming sovereignty is just a rebel regime or a separatist force. There's no concept of shared or separate sovereignty possible in their framework.
It's a very absolute position. No room for nuance there.
None at all. Now, let's revisit UN Resolution 2758 from their angle, because their interpretation is the polar opposite of Taiwan's and many others.
Right. They say it proves their sovereignty. How?
Their argument is, the resolution recognized the PRC as the sole legitimate representative of China in the UN. Since, in their view, there is only one China and Taiwan is part of China, then by recognizing the PRC, the UN implicitly acknowledged PRC sovereignty over all of China, including Taiwan.
So even though Taiwan isn't mentioned,
the logic follows that denying Taiwan independent status is inherent in recognizing the PRC as the sole representative of China. They see it as a comprehensive statement on the One China principle, legally binding on everyone, which justifies excluding Taiwan from all international bodies.
Okay, I see the logic, even if others dispute it. Now let's talk about their historical storytelling. You mentioned it's selective. How do they pick and choose?
It's definitely a curated narrative. They heavily emphasize the Qing dynasty period, when Taiwan was formally incorporated as a province, briefly, near the end. This highlights a period of clear Chinese administration, suggesting a long, unbroken link.
What about after Japan?
Then they stress that post-Japanese rule, Taiwan should have been returned to China based on the Cairo and Potsdam declarations from WWII. They treat these wartime statements almost like legally binding treaties guaranteeing Taiwan's return to them, the PRC, retroactively.
Even though they weren't treaties and mentioned the ROC, not the PRC.
Correct. Minor details in their narrative. But then comes the San Francisco Peace Treaty, which is a treaty, but doesn't fit their story.
And this is where the magic trick gets really blatant. The dismissal you mentioned.
Oh, yeah. This is where their interpretation becomes, well, let's just say creative. Their take on the San Francisco Treaty is basically, well, okay, the treaty didn't explicitly say Taiwan returns to China, but everyone knew it was supposed to. It was just badly written. Plus, we, the PRC, weren't invited and weren't recognized yet, so it doesn't apply to us anyway.
Slightly incredulous.
Yeah.
Just badly written. A major post-war treaty defining territorial boundaries.
That's the line. The idea that multiple nations drafting a crucial treaty would just fumble the wording on such a key point, or that its meaning relies on some unwritten understanding, it really stretches credulity. It shows how they'll elevate documents that help them, like 2758, Cairo, Potsdam, and dismiss or reinterpret those that don't, like San Francisco.
Okay, let's dig a bit deeper into this overall persuasion logic China uses. It seems very comprehensive.
It is. First, there's the constant emphasis on history and a supposed legal basis, framing Dutch and Japanese rule as brief interruptions in millennia of Chinese connection, highlighting UN administration of Penghu, Koxinga, Qing rule, stressing Cairo Potsdam as moral, if not strictly legal, justification. Internally, this fuels nationalism and makes unification seem like righting a historical wrong.
It's history weaponized for a political goal.
You could say that. Second, the relentless use of UN Resolution 2758 and claims of international recognition. They wave 2758 like a legal banner and point to the 180-plus countries recognizing the One China principle as proof the world agrees with them. It creates an impression of global consensus, aiming to isolate Taiwan and pressure dissenters.
Using diplomatic recognition numbers as validation.
Exactly. Third, the outright denial of Taiwan's independent status, labeling the democratic government local, dismissing the ROC constitution, framing independence as illegal under their own anti-secession law. Internally, this paints Taiwan as a rebellious province and supporting unification as patriotic duty.
And they back this up with hard power. Not just words.
Absolutely. Fourth is the use of economic and military leverage. Trade restrictions, corporate coercion, constant military drills, jets crossing the median line. It's all designed to intimidate Taiwan, showcase PRC power, and make unification seem inevitable, or the alternative, too costly. Internally, it projects strength.
And finally, it all seems wrapped up in nationalism and a sense of moral imperative.
That's the emotional core. Unification is tied to the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation, overcoming the century of humiliation. Taiwanese separatism is cast as a betrayal of this grand historical narrative, an obstacle to China reclaiming its rightful place. This resonates deeply and makes compromise extremely difficult politically.
Okay, so we have Taiwan's reality and China's very different narrative. How does the rest of the world, the international community, see this? Where do they see the loopholes or the strengths in each side's case?
This is where it gets really complex and often contradictory. The key distinction internationally is between de facto status and de jure status.
Reality versus legal recognition.
Exactly. De facto, in practice, most observers would agree, Taiwan checks all the boxes of a state. It has the people, land, government, sovereignty. In practice, it functions independently.
Walks like a duck, quacks like a duck.
Pretty much. But then you have the de jure status, the formal legal recognition, and that's where it's ambiguous. Taiwan's not in the UN, lacks widespread formal diplomatic ties, and that San Francisco Treaty left its final status legally undetermined.
So what's the general consensus among international lawyers or diplomats?
The common view is something like, Taiwan is a de facto state, but not a de jure universally recognized state. That distinction allows countries to acknowledge the reality of Taiwan's existence while navigating the political sensitivities with China.
Which leads directly to things like the U.S.'s strategic ambiguity, right?
Precisely. The U.S. has its One China policy, which is different from Beijing's One China principle. The U.S. acknowledges Beijing's position that there is one China and Taiwan is part of China, but the U.S. does not recognize PRC sovereignty over Taiwan.
So acknowledging the claim without endorsing it.
Right. And crucially, the U.S. doesn't support Taiwan's formal independence, a de jure declaration, but maintains robust unofficial ties and the capacity to help Taiwan defend itself under the Taiwan Relations Act. It's a tightrope walk trying to maintain stability.
But despite this ambiguity, there's undeniable support for Taiwan's values, its democracy. You hear that more and more.
Absolutely. Taiwan's democracy, free press, rule of law, it stands in stark contrast to the PRC. This makes Taiwan a natural partner for Western democracies. It's seen as a democratic model.
And you see that in concrete support.
Yeah, G7 statements, EU actions, Japan, Australia, the U.S. consistently calling for Taiwan's participation in international organizations like the World Health Assembly, and strongly opposing any unilateral change to the status quo by force. It's clear they value Taiwan's democracy and stability.
But that creates a tension, doesn't it? Supporting Taiwan's values versus avoiding a massive conflict with China.
That's the core geopolitical contradiction for many Western powers. They want to support democratic Taiwan, but they desperately want to avoid war with nuclear-armed China.
So the result is ambiguity.
Exactly. Don't recognize Taiwan formally, but oppose force. Support its participation, but avoid provoking Beijing too much. It's a constant, delicate balancing act.
And China sees this balancing act as hypocritical, duplicitous.
Pretty much. From Beijing's perspective, it looks like the West is trying to keep Taiwan separate permanently, contain China, pay lip service to one China while undermining it. It fuels deep distrust.
Okay, so let's try that table analysis you mentioned. Looking objectively, where are the strengths and loopholes for each side, and maybe for the international community itself?
All right, Taiwan's strengths. Its functioning democracy is huge, gives it legitimacy and international sympathy. Public opinion backs self-determination. Its tech and economic power, especially chips, makes it indispensable. It acts like a country, moral high ground in many ways.
Okay, and Taiwan's loopholes or weaknesses?
The biggest is the lack of formal international recognition, de jure status. That creates legal and diplomatic vulnerabilities. Also, a potential risk. If Taiwan pushed too hard, too fast for formal independence, it could be seen as provoking China and triggering the conflict everyone wants to avoid. So achieving the ultimate goal could paradoxically be destabilizing.
Right. Now, China's strength.
They have their international legal arguments, even if disputed, like their reading of 2758. They have their curated historical narrative, which resonates domestically. But their undeniable strength is raw power. Military might, and massive economic leverage. They can coerce and intimidate. Many countries are simply wary of crossing them.
In China's loopholes, where are they weak?
Several big ones. Their overinterpretation of 2758 isn't widely accepted legally. Their dismissal of Taiwan's democratic will looks bad internationally. And crucially, their use of military threats and coercion. That really undermines their claims to a peaceful rise and damages their standing. The saber rattling is seen as the main source of instability by many.
Okay, lastly, the international community's loopholes. They're not blameless either.
No. The main issue is the potential for double standards, or the ambiguity itself leading to miscalculation, saying you support democracy, but then sometimes staying quiet due to economic interests with China. It's that tension we talked about.
Like saying, I support you to Taiwan, then whispering, let's do business to China.
Kind of. This inconsistency can breed cynicism. Taiwan might feel abandoned. China might see weakness or an opportunity to push harder. It makes managing the situation very tricky.
So, summing up that third-party view.
Both sides have issues, but China's military pressure and disregard for Taiwan's democracy are generally seen as the main drivers of current tension. Taiwan gets sympathy for its democracy, but needs to be cautious about provoking conflict. The international community's goal is mostly managing the status quo de facto independence without formal declaration to prevent war, but their own inconsistencies can complicate things. The fundamental problem is the lack of any common ground or room for compromise.
Which brings us right back to the core of this whole discussion. China's historical document magic trick. It's not just about differing views. It seems like a deliberate strategy of manipulating the past for present goals.
That's exactly what it looks like from the outside. The core magic trick is this remarkable ability China demonstrates to have a highly selective memory regarding historical documents and international agreements.
If it helps their case, it's sacred.
Sacred, undeniable, universally binding, even if the original context was totally different. But if a document doesn't support their narrative, or worse, contradicts it, poof. It's irrelevant, it's expired, it was badly written, it never really counted, or they just ignore it completely.
It's like a history buffet, but they only pick the dishes they like and declare the rest inedible.
That's a good way to put it. Let's start with the document they treat as the most sacred, the ace up their sleeve. UN Resolution 2758.
We touched on this, but what's the specific magic here?
Okay, background. 1971, resolution gives PRC the China seat, kicks out ROC, doesn't mention Taiwan's sovereignty, China's spin. This is it, divine proof, the ultimate guarantee of our sovereignty over Taiwan. They claim it implicitly confirmed Taiwan belongs to the PRC because it recognized only one representative for China.
And the magical leap is?
The leap is massively exaggerating its scope, ignoring all the countries saying, whoa, hold on, it only addressed the UN seat, not sovereignty. They inflate this narrow procedural resolution into an unchallengeable legal basis for their territorial claim. Then they wield it like a weapon to block Taiwan's participation everywhere, claiming 2758 mandates it.
Why this specific document? What's the motive for elevating it so much?
Getting the UN seat was a huge diplomatic victory, legitimizing the PRC on the world stage after decades of the ROC holding it. So stretching 2758's meaning reinforces that legitimacy, provides a powerful, if flawed, legal argument for one China, and rallies domestic support around that principle. It's foundational to their international narrative.
Okay, so that's the sacred one. What about the ones they treat more flexibly? Like the Cairo and Potsdam declarations. Not sacred, but useful tools.
Exactly. These are treated with a different kind of magic, more like interpretive dance. Cairo, 1943. US, UK, ROC say Taiwan should return to the Republic of China. Potsdam, 1945, reaffirms Cairo's terms. Important context. These were wartime statements of intent, not formal, legally binding treaties. Their legal weight is debatable.
So how does China spin these flexible documents?
Their spin. Look, during WWII, the Allies agreed Taiwan should come back to China. Okay, maybe they weren't treaties, but they show the historical consensus. It's the moral truth.
So the magic is emphasizing moral weight over legal status.
Yes, and conveniently ignoring that they mentioned the ROC, not the PRC, which didn't exist then. They use the general sentiment of return to China to bolster their claim, blurring the lines between wartime intention and post-war legal reality.
Why use these if they're legally weaker?
Because they fit the historical narrative of Taiwan was stolen and should be returned. They fuel nationalism, make the claim feel historically justified, even if the legal basis is shaky. It adds another layer to the persuasion campaign.
Now, for the big disappearing act, the document that apparently doesn't count, the San Francisco Peace Treaty, this feels like the most direct contradiction.
It really is. This treaty, 1951, is where Japan formally renounced its claim to Taiwan. But crucially for China, it didn't say who Taiwan went to. And the PRC wasn't there. The ROC didn't sign. It creates that inconvenient ambiguity about Taiwan's status.
So China just makes it vanish. What's the official exchange?
Basically. Doesn't count. We weren't there. We weren't recognized. It's irrelevant to us. A complete dismissal of a major international treaty that formally ended the war with Japan for many countries.
It's like saying the Treaty of Versailles doesn't count because a particular country wasn't happy with it later. It's bold.
It is bold. The magic is simply erasing a key legal document because it doesn't fit the narrative. It stands in stark contrast to their reverence for 2758, shows the purely instrumental approach. Useful means valid, inconvenient means invalid.
And the motive is obvious. Eliminate the ambiguity.
Exactly. Dismissing San Francisco gets rid of that pesky question about Taiwan's undetermined status. It allows them to present a simple, unbroken chain of Taiwan belongs to China without inconvenient legal knots.
Okay, finally, the most audacious trick, perhaps? The Sino-British Joint Declaration on Hong Kong. The one that went from binding treaty to historical document.
This one is truly breathtaking in its implications. Background: 1984, a formal international treaty registered with the UN. China promises Hong Kong a high degree of autonomy, one country, two systems, for 50 years after the 1997 handover. Clear, legally binding commitment.
And China's spin now. How did this binding treaty suddenly expire?
Their line now is, oh, the Joint Declaration. That's just a historical document. It fulfilled its purpose when Hong Kong returned. Hong Kong's affairs are now purely internal. End of discussion. No foreign interference.
Wow. Just unilaterally declaring a UN-registered international treaty null and void because it's become inconvenient.
It's probably the most blatant example of the magic. Taking a clear international legal obligation and dismissing it as a historical relic to avoid accountability for actions in Hong Kong, especially post-national security law. It directly contradicts how they treat 2758, which they insist is eternally binding. It's a move that fundamentally shakes trust in China's commitment to international law.
What's the motive for this particular vanishing act?
Primarily, to shut down international criticism over Hong Kong. By labeling it internal affairs and dismissing the treaty, they try to deflect scrutiny and paint foreign concerns as illegitimate interference. It sends a chilling message. International agreements might only last as long as they suit Beijing.
So let's try to sum up the logic behind this magic. It seems to be entirely interest-driven, first and foremost.
Absolutely. A document's validity, in practice, seems solely determined by whether it serves China's current national interests and the One China narrative.
And there's a consistent blurring of lines between different types of documents or claims.
Yes, conflating moral claims or historical intent, Cairo, with legal validity, like a treaty, while downplaying actual treaties, San Francisco, that are inconvenient. It's about crafting the most persuasive narrative, not necessarily the most legally sound one.
This is all enabled by tight information control.
Crucial. Domestically, the state controls the narrative. People often only hear the official version. Internationally, they relentlessly push their interpretations using their clout.
And that incredibly flexible definition of internal affairs.
Right. It's a shield for things like Hong Kong, where they want to avoid scrutiny under international agreements. But it's a demand regarding Taiwan, insisting the world respect their definition of an internal affair, even with its global implications. It's a convenient, adaptable tool.
Given how transparent the contradictions seem from the outside, why does this magic work so well, especially inside China?
It's powerful internally for a few key reasons. One, nationalism. It taps into deep patriotic feelings, linking Taiwan-Hong Kong to historical grievances, century of humiliation, and future glory, great rejuvenation, makes unification feel like destiny.
2, information control, as you said. If you only ever hear one story,
it becomes the truth. Alternative views or inconvenient facts just aren't readily available to challenge the official narrative. 3, perceived authority. Citing UN resolutions, WWII declarations even selectively lends an air of international legitimacy and historical weight to their claims. Makes it sound official, globally endorsed.
And 4, raw power.
Yeah. China's growing economic and military strength makes the narrative feel achievable, inevitable. Power lends credibility, internally at least. It suggests they can make their claims reality.
But surely this magic has limits, especially externally. It can't fool everyone, and it must have costs.
Oh, absolutely. Externally, the legal flaws are glaring. Their interpretations of 2758 or Cairo-Potsdam don't convince international legal experts. Their dismissal of the San Francisco Treaty or the Joint Declaration is widely criticized. It damages their legal credibility.
And the moral contradictions, especially with Hong Kong.
Huge damage. Dismissing the Joint Declaration erodes trust significantly. If China can unilaterally declare a UN-registered treaty obsolete, why trust any agreement they sign? It paints them as unreliable, undermining their goal of being seen as a responsible great power.
Does this translate into actual geopolitical backlash?
Yes. This behavior, plus the military threats, pushes countries like the US, Japan, Australia, even some in Europe, closer together, and strengthens their unofficial ties with Taiwan. It fuels alliances aimed at counterbalancing China, which is often the opposite of their intended effect.
Are there internal risks too? Overplaying the nationalism card.
Definitely. Relying so heavily on nationalism makes compromise on Taiwan almost impossible for the leadership, even if it were strategically wise. And if unification doesn't happen or faces major setbacks, it could potentially damage the party's credibility, especially if the population has been fed a narrative of inevitable victory. It creates very high, potentially brittle expectations.
Okay, so wrapping this all up, we've unpacked Taiwan's case for its de facto independence, China's determined counter-narrative built on selective history and law, and the international community's tightrope walk.
And we've seen how China's approach often feels like this massive, ongoing self-hypnosis seminar, as you put it, fueled by nationalism, historical myths, and a claim to absolute legitimacy.
While Taiwan's strength seems rooted more in its democratic reality, its people's will, international sympathy for its values, and its undeniable economic importance. A different kind of power.
A very different kind. But the challenges are stark. That question hangs heavy. Will the world ever prioritize smooth relations with China over Taiwan's democracy? It's a deeply uncomfortable question.
And can Taiwan maintain its own internal unity against external pressure and influence? That's vital for them.
And maybe the starkest point for Taiwan. The need to fully grasp that China isn't just debating history. It's issuing an ultimatum backed by force. It's a fundamental clash. We live this reality versus you belong to our history.
Yeah, it's less, you say you're my dad, but I've never seen you, versus a discussion, and more versus, if you don't acknowledge me, I will use force. That's the underlying threat.
Exactly. And China's magic with documents continues because they're not really discussing history. They're arranging the pieces, demanding submission. Their selective use of documents damages global trust. But the core problem is that lack of any shared ground for compromise.
Which leaves us, and you listening, with a tough question. What is the path forward when realities and histories are so fundamentally opposed, and one side uses magic with documents to enforce its will? What does this whole situation mean for international rules for self-determination down the road?
A lot to think about.
Indeed. Well, that was certainly a lot to unpack today. We really hope exploring this gave you some new perspectives, maybe a few aha moments on this incredibly complex issue.
Yeah, it's a situation with huge implications.
Yeah.
If you found this helpful or interesting, make sure you're subscribed to Sip and Talk wherever you get your podcasts.
And hey, before we sign off, a huge shout out to our good friend Micky. Seriously, folks, you have got to check out Micky's YouTube channel. It's called Micky to Life.
Oh yeah, Micky's great. Hilarious memes, awesome music taste, these amazing wine tasting videos.
And fantastic travel vlogs. Micky, you rock. Go Taiwan. For Micky, who is Taiwanese, in case you didn't know.
Thanks for sipping and talking with us.